الأنبياء والمرسلين شفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى قيام يوم الدين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Being the day very close to the birth anniversary of our blessed Imam Ali Salamullah alayh, I thought we would speak on the sense of Imam Ali's righteousness and justice. And the reason why I was delayed in coming down today was because the ICJ was pronouncing its judgment and I couldn't wait any further, so I had to come down. But it seemed that it was going in the favor of the South African demands for the protection of the Palestinians. And I hope indeed that that was the judgment. If anybody is watching it while I'm talking, just gesture to me that that is indeed the case. Khalifa Umar, a few days prior to his death, it is reported prior to the attack and the stabbing of the caliph, he was drowned in deep thought. And he was asked, "What preoccupies you?" Ibn Abbas, I believe, asked him. He said, "I'm thinking of the leadership of the Ummah after me. And I'm lost as to who should lead the Ummah." So Ibn Abbas, I believe it was, suggested, "What about Ali?" He said, "By God, if Ali were to take the reins of Khilafah, he would lead people in accordance with the example of the Blessed Prophet. But my fear is that people will not be able to withstand Ali." Now what he meant there appears to say the righteousness that Imam Ali has and the sense of strict justice that Imam Ali has would not be tolerated by the people. The people are not capable of tolerating his sense of justice. Now, if you turn to Khutbah Shaqshaqiyya, the Imam himself states to this effect. He said, the first two caliphs, they kept the others of Khilafah so strictly amongst themselves that it had become a rough place. It wasn't something that you could talk about or challenge. Then he says, pointing at this very thing that Khalifa Umar had said, he said, now the state of the Muslim community has become such that it has become like an unruly camel. If the rider upon its back, this is after Imam Ali ascended or exceeded after his accession to Khilafah, he said, now if the rider, meaning the head of the community, were to intend to bring the camel under control and pull the reins of the camel to slow it down from dragging itself to destruction, it would slit the nostrils of the camel and cause it to bleed to death. And if the rider were to leave loose the reins of Khilafah or the direction that the community is going, the camel will lead itself to its ultimate destruction in any case. Now you can see here that the effects of unrighteous leadership. Now I'm not here saying that Khalifa Abu Bakr and Khalifa Umar were totally corrupt or whatever. But what I'm here to say is that what Khalifa Umar said, that the Ummah will not be able to withstand his sense of righteousness and justice, was because he saw the state of the people. Now it might not have been due to him entirely, but the situations created through not having a righteous leader after the Blessed Prophet. We found after the demise of the Blessed Prophet, the apostasy wars, when people were leaving the faith. And then we found the expansion of the empire of Islam or the domain of Islam. And people were coming to Islam, but without the moral and the spiritual message of Islam. It was more so conquests and bringing people within the folds of a newly established religion with a socio-political structure that was also being developed, where people didn't understand what was the true God-centric spiritual message that the Prophet had brought. It was more of a convenience which happens in history of mankind. But Imam Ali Salamullah alayhi was a person whose inner state and disposition was such that he was uncorruptible and could not withstand unrighteousness and injustice. So we see this again in a letter or a response of his to Muawiyah. I believe it's in Najul Balagha. Now, the reason why I show skepticism in quoting the sources is because I have read them a very, very long time ago. In that letter, from what I remember, the Imam states to Muawiyah that had I wanted to, I can outwit you and be far more cunning than you are. But this is below my dignity. I cannot do such a thing. It's a very important thing that he is saying, that a leader within his own self has to be uncorruptible, has to abide by the precepts of justice. There can be no favoritism. There can be no coercion. There can be no bribery. If the Quran says, La ikrah fid deen, there is no coercion in deen, then it means that the only way a God-centered religion can work is when people wholesomely surrender themselves to the divine principle. It cannot be through coercion. And we see this notion of, and I often talk about this, means being justified by ends. But that works for bodies, not for minds or for souls. You see this story as we develop this theme, that Aqil, the brother of the Imam, goes to Imam, and it's depicted in Nahjul Balagha, in which the sermon starts as Aqil came to me with his children. Their faces were bony, hair unkempt, complexion was pale. And he asked me for more than his share of the public treasury, in which he asked for a fistful of your wheat or your barley. Thereupon, I heated a rod within the fire next to me, and I drew that rod near to Aqil. And he screamed, and he said, Ali, do you wish to burn me and chastise me? The Imam said, how strange. A fire prepared as a plaything for children's amusement frightens you to this extent, and yet you call me to the eternal fire by abandoning the precepts of righteousness and justice. Aqil said to him, in that case, I should go to Muawiyah. He said, indeed, go to Muawiyah if that is what you want. And of course, the rest of the story, you know, and I will not repeat it. So this statement that we often hear from the speakers, that Ali was put to that due to his sense of justice and righteousness, is valid. If you look at Imam Ali, when he gains the position of Khilafah, he is advised by a couple of people that do not remove the governors that Khalifa Uthman has placed. It is an imprudential act to do that because it will cause rebellion. The Imam, in his reply, again, from what I recall, he said, it is true what you say, but these people have been so corrupt, and my sense of righteousness cannot allow me to keep them in such positions of authority. Hence, he removed them. And then again, Khalifa Umar had set up a particular system whereby the Sahaba and others were categorized in accordance with their worthiness to receive their shares of the public treasury or the Baytul Mal. Imam Ali comes and he abolishes it. He says, you're all equal according to the law of the Quran and the Prophet. There is no disparity amongst you. We see from here that it is Imam Ali's sense of righteousness and strict sense of justice that we are observing. And it is something that the Ummah is unable to absorb in their behavior. They can't abide by this sense of justice. And inevitably, that is what brings the scholars to say that Imam Ali was not a shrewd, astute politician. And I will say yes, he wasn't a shrewd politician because of the very fact that politics is about governing the bodies, irrespective of the notion of righteousness or hereafter. Whereas Imam Ali was setting up a new standard, like his blessed brother, the Prophet, that governance of the human body within an Islamic context has to be in accordance with the will of God. And the will of God is not to bring the foreheads into prostration. Rather, the will of God is the creation of a spiritually, morally endowed community. So in that respect, yes, he wasn't a politician. If the yardstick of politics is to govern people by all costs, is to look at our own interest. So if you look at the issue of Israel, Joe Biden in his younger days, and then we see this now, there's these clips displayed on social media in which he says that had there not been an Israel, we would have had to create one to secure our interest within the region. That is politics. That, well, if we don't have a safeguard, a vanguard in the Middle East, well, Russia, China, they will predominate in the region. And therefore, we need something there to safeguard our own interests. The logic of Imam Ali was not that. Neither was the logic of the Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And neither did Hazrat Isa see any sense in such logic. These people had a foresight into the real objectives. What they understood was that the Muslim Ummah is a part and parcel of a human community. And you can see this from the statement of Imam Ali, where he instructs Malik Ashtar, and he states that epic statement that we repeat: a person is either your brother in faith or your equal in humanity. They understood humanity essentially to be one community. And their aim was to bring humanity to a pedestal where the whole of humankind matures within godliness, within righteousness and morality. And what else can be God's aim from the creation of this earth and humanity, on placing humanity on the face of this earth? Think about it carefully as we progress into this sermon. You know, the nature of God is breathed within us. We are endowed with the nature of God. Inevitably, we will act out the nature of our author that is within us. It's undeniable. As God is, then so are his creatures. We are the same as our God in that sense. If you have a class of students, the instructor is not going to be partial to some over others in terms of their success, because the success of the instructor is contingent upon the success of the whole class. So the instructor wants the success of the whole class, every one of their students. If you look at a parent, mother and father, they want all of their children to succeed, not some over others, for that is their ultimate success. Then how can the creator of the sentiment that an instructor is endowed with and the hearts of parents are filled with be any different? This is the same sentiment that is being reflected in us, that is by priority in our creator. How can our creator want a group of people to succeed and the rest of humanity to fail? Obviously, the intent of our creator is for humanity in its entirety to succeed. And in fact, if you look at the eschatological literature of Mahdiism, you will find that he will have Christians and Jews, and he will rule by Injil and Torah. And I know the ulama will say that this hadith is not authentic. And this is the problem with the ulama. They don't look at the human ethos. They look at the validity of the chain or the popularity of hadith. Things are intuitive, they're intuitively known. The Quran says, call on to the people of the book to come on that which is confirmed by us altogether, that we will not worship save Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet said that. That was the initiation of his message. Can you imagine the culmination of this message? So people like Imam Ali were looking towards the end of the road, not at the immediate juncture that they stood at. And that's why they left that sort of an immortal example for humanity to follow. And within the Muslim history, if you look at Khalifa, the eighth Khalifa of the Umayyah, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, one of the most righteous and truthful Khalifas that we have ever seen. He abolished the distinction between the Mawali, non-Arab reverts to Islam, and the Arabs. And he says, no, there's equality. He restored the rights of the dhimmis, those paying land tax, and those paying jizya, and those paying land tax, kharaj, as opposed to zakat, and the Muslims were obliged to pay zakat. But there was a whole-scale abuse of the rights of the dhimmis. He guaranteed their proper rights. He wasn't one who was interested in expanding the borders of Islam through conquests, and therefore he recalled the armies from Byzantine. And I'm sure there must have been other reasons for his decision as well. But as a result, we find possibly that groups, and possibly large groups of people, embraced Islam through that moral example of that leader. And he's in fact seen as one of the most righteous khulafa that Muslims have ever produced, after the era of what the Sunni brothers terms as the era of the rightly guided caliphs, which were 5, with Imam Ali and Imam Hassan for the 6 months duration of Imam Hassan's Khilafah. So Imam Ali was looking not at the immediate situation, but his mind was towards the education of the community and lead it in a direction that ultimately would take them to culmination within their fullness of their human glory. Now you might say, well, Imam Ali only stayed there for 4 years. How relevant is his example? The very fact that today his example is being celebrated by the Muslims in their entirety, and the non-Muslims are looking at his example. The very fact that we are reminding ourselves of his example shows that he had his input at that point, and that input has served to accelerate this growth of conscience. Now, if you look at Imam Ali in his sermon that he delivered at Siffin, he says, "O people, I have rights upon you by the fact that you have chosen me as your leader, but you too have rights upon me. And when I give my rights, and when you give my rights to me and I give your rights to you, rights become respected. Rights become honorable, and we find balance, harmony. Look at our present world. I will say this much, that in my opinion, democracy is far better than any other form of rulership or governance of people upon themselves through another. It's far better. Yet look at the flaws within democracy and how far we need to go. On the one hand, direct democracy is not possible due to the logistics and lack of education of people. On the other hand, look at the flaws within representational democracy. 80% of Britons want a ceasefire. Our Prime Minister, who has not been elected into office by us, refuses to budge, does not want to call for a ceasefire. A great number of Americans are calling for ceasefire. Joe Biden adamantly is opposed to twisting the arm of Israel, to stop their onslaught and slaughter of the Palestinians. Here we are seeing that the rights of the people are not being given by the rulers to their people. And there you see, in the Battle of Siffin, on the verge of victory, Imam Ali is forced by the people to enter within arbitration. As he enters within arbitration, it is decided against him and not in his favor. It is here now that the people ask him to resume battle. But for that moment, he is true to the arbitration and he honors it. He says, well, you've decided this. You finished the whole battle by this false arbitration when we were on the verge of winning. But you can see his righteousness and truthfulness to his principles and to the sense of justice. In one or two places, and I just want to mention this because my time has run away, in honor of our Mawla, Imam Ali Salamullah alayh. In one of places he says, I think it was in his khutbah, in his letter to Uthman bin Hunayf. I mean, yes, and on that point, Uthman bin Hunayf was in Basra. Imam Ali is in Medina or Kufa. At that point, he was in Kufa. And Uthman bin Hunayf, as you know, he partakes in that banquet. Imam Ali writes a letter to him and he says, I cannot imagine that a governor of mine would abandon the poor people and concede to attending a banquet in which only the dignitaries and the wealthy are called. Isn't that amazing? He's so vigilant about his governors. Where do you find within the Islamic world, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, where the grand scholars are so mindful of the actions of their wakala and their representatives? He is immediately aware what Uthman bin Hunayf is doing. And he immediately reprimands Uthman bin Hunayf that this is not worthy because this reflects badly upon me and my governorship and my righteous example. He said, I know you will not be able to adhere to my example. Your Imam has sufficed in his sustenance by a stale piece of bread and in his garment through a ripped cloak. And you will not be able to do that, but at least be pious, God-centered, mindful of others. In that khutbah, he says that if all of Arabia were to unite behind me, it will not encourage me in the least in my resolve to fight corruption. And if the whole of Arabia were to abandon me, it will not discourage me even to the minimal extent from standing at the front line of combating evil and corruption. And I will not cease in my campaign until I cleanse the wheat germ of the dust that surrounds it. Can you imagine such an example? Indeed, we can't follow the precept of justice in the way that Ali Salamullah alayhi has followed it, and righteousness in the way that Imam Ali has followed it. Now, I will say this, and I've been saying this to some of my colleagues and my students, that I have always admired Imam Ali for his God-centricity, his deep-seated spirituality, his statements, his knowledge that is unequal. Like this ulama abrar doesn't make sense to me. It's as nonsensical as the other extreme. The guy has a touch of divinity about him. And I'll explain that if Allah gives me life in a few years' time to come. He is a supreme example for mankind to uphold and to be led by. You don't find people like Ali. I don't even think the rest of the Imams could live up to his example. Leave aside anybody else. Again, going by what I have read in my previous years, he sat there in his khilafah and he was mending his broken slipper. Now, Ibn Abbas, I believe it was, he had seen the way in which Khalifa Uthman lived, and he favored the Bani Umayyah, and some of the noble companions used to live. And he obviously saw how the inheritance of Talha or Zubair after their death at Siffin, no, at Jamal was distributed, hundreds of thousands of dinars being distributed in inheritance. And he saw Imam Ali mending his broken slipper. So he said, "This is the state that I see of yours, and you are a Khalifa, and the previous example was such and such." The Imam replies to him, he said, "If I cannot tackle poverty and restore societal justice, then your Khilafah to me means less than my broken slipper." Where do you see this? I mean, I've just said this a couple of days ago, that when somebody goes to visit him, he asks, was it Amr ibn As? He said, "Do you come to me on a personal matter or a matter related to the government?" He said, "Personal matter." He blows out the candle. Amr, I think, asks, "Well, why did you do that?" He said, "That belongs to the Muslims. It's from the public treasury for the affairs of the Muslims. You've come in a personal capacity, so I will light my own candle." He is seen at night sweeping the Baytul Mal. They ask him why. He said, "To see if the right of the Ummah is left upon me. To see if a single coin has not been distributed." A sense of justice was not this, that look, let the people starve, we'll multiply the capital and then we'll feed them. No, it's their right and God has given it to them. Give them their rights. In another one of his khutbah, he says, "Oh people, I am the only leader in whom you have the confidence that I will give you your right when you come to me. And I have no confidence in you to give me my right." And there are things that we can talk about this great man that are unending, and you can go on and on and on and on. What a supreme person. What a supreme person. I'm going to have to end, unfortunately. But I will say this much, that having this deep, deep-seated love for Imam Ali, having this Malang type of veneration for Imam Ali, is for me an essence of faith. I really do not distinguish between the depth of love that we should have for the Blessed Prophet to be any different to the depth of love we should have for this grand person, Ali ibn Abi Talib. If I believe, which I do, that Isa and Ibrahim salamullah alayhima and the teachings of Moses and Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam should come at the helm of humanity, that these are people who transcend distinction and who are beyond religion. These are the people whose moral and spiritual example is something that is a heritage of humanity at large, and humanity should take pride in them. They should be beyond distinction. Then I believe at the same time and with full force that Ali's example belongs there. He should be placed alongside these prophets. His sense of righteousness, his sense of piety, his sense of justice. Away from this notion of Khilafah. Yes, Abu Bakr was the first Khalifa, undeniably, historically it's occurred. But in terms of his example as a righteous, godly, fair, just, humble, noble human being, it belongs there. It's a great source of disappointment that we've reduced him to comparisons that we make. In any case, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of our blessed Imam Ali, bring about within our souls a sense of righteousness and justice. Can we pray for our children, mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters who have unjustly and brutally lost their lives in Gaza? And I will also say the innocent lives lost in Israel, and people around the world who have lost their lives to oppression. Can we pray a Fatiha for them and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring relief for the people of Gaza and sense to the people of Israel and goodness within our human community? Al-Fatiha. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وآله الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I'm going to have to say what I want to say, but forgive me on this instance for taking your time. Imam Ali's commitment to righteousness made him fearless, and that is what a leader needs. You need to be fearless. Aside from cleansing the heart of greed and insecurities of wealth and insecurity of poverty, leaders and anybody in a position of leadership needs to be fearless. I know we are all filled with fear. It's a human condition. But we need to remind ourselves one thing, as Ali said. He said, I would rather stand on thorns, bare feet, and be enchained and dragged upon my face, rather than to face my God and His Habib with a single violation against the creatures of God on the day of Qiyamah. We should remind ourselves that I'm going to stand before God. If this life is taken, let it be taken. Who cares? It's unworthy anyway. If it's taken for the sake of God, I'll feel some level of worth. You know, I've seen so many people, grand scholars and little scholars and leaders, just filled with insecurity, being bribed, filled with the fear of hate, rejection of people. What will people call them? What will people tell them? He is Mossad and he is CIA and he is MI6 and MI5 and I don't know, DIY or whatever. And trust me, I've had all of them. Alhamdulillah. You have to be fearless. You know, even if there is fear, you have to rid it from your soul. Now I want to say something. 1,000,000+ people, we marched, and a lot of you were there. Haji Taimur, Mohsin Bhai, Hamid Bhai, you were too little, but I think you were there. We marched in Hyde Park, over 1,000,000, against Tony Blair's decision to take us to war, under the pretext of Saddam possessing weapons of mass destruction. That war resulted in the destruction of over 1,000,000 people, displacement of millions. Tony Blair was asked, well, there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. He said it was still worthwhile. And same American administration said the same thing. Obviously, we were appalled at this. Then we come to Libya. We went to war with Libya. We've messed the country up. Don't messed it up. Yes? Then now, this war in Gaza. Look at the way we are conducting ourselves. First and foremost, Keir Starmer, when he spoke on the onslaught of Russia upon the Ukrainians, he said, definitely they've committed war crimes. They asked him about Gaza. He said, I'm not a lawyer. We leave this to the lawyers. I can't say if it's a war crime. I hope ICJ is more on the path of righteousness than Keir Starmer is. Then you look at Sunak. He repeats the same old rhetoric. So Starmer was asked about the blockade of fuel, water, and food. And he said, yes, Israel has a right to defend itself. And Sunak says, whenever he repeats the same thing, Hamas, the horrific attack of October the 7th, and Israel has a full right to defend itself. Obviously, what Hamas did was horrific. But why collective punishment of the Palestinians? And you know the history. We gave the mandate to United Nations to create the problem in the first place back in the day. Yes? You know Hamas has not taken birth in a vacuum, as the Chief of United Nations stated to us. It's been a long history. Why can't you call for a ceasefire when 80% of the people of this country are asking for a ceasefire? This is where then I begin to think that do they know something that we do not know? that the rest of the world does not know, aside from Britain and America only? Do these two countries know something hidden that the rest of us are oblivious to? Then immediately I am reminded of Jeremy Corbyn, who stood against oppression of the Gazans and the Palestinians. And he calls for a ceasefire. And had Labour had the sense of keeping that man there and not removing him through the charges of anti-Semitism, and he is not an anti-Semite. None of us are anti-Semites. It's against our religion. We love every human being. We love the Jew as we love a Muslim and a Christian and a Hindu and a Sikh. These are our human brothers and sisters in our family and our soul. He would have been against this. So surely the people in the highest rank of government should know the same thing known by each other. Had Jeremy Corbyn been elected as the leader of Labour, he would have said a different thing. So that's when we say that Sunak does not know or has insight into any special hidden knowledge that the rest don't have. There is no special hidden knowledge. The only thing I can conclude is that people like Blair and Sunak and Biden are either people who have been corrupted, manipulated, fearful, living up to some agreements that they have made at the cost of justice. That's the only thing I can conclude, that these people have no valid reason. And the fact is that they know very well that history will condemn them after their deaths. Blair is already condemned, but still, there is no recourse to justice that we can bring him to account. And how do you bring justice to a man who is responsible for the deaths of 1 million people anyway? It's an impossible task in this world. You can't do it. So maybe these people have this sort of a crooked belief that their belief is going to save them in the hereafter, or is motivated by some religious belief, or through bribery, or through persuasion, or through gain, or, as Biden said, if Israel wasn't there, we would have to create it for the sake of securing our interests. Or maybe they are thinking beyond themselves and thinking of the country. But if that's what they're doing, then people like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn were not equating oppression against people with the security of their nation. So we can see here that it's a skewed up mentality, a totally messed up state of affairs in the minds of these people, the politicians at the helm of government. We are far away from reaching a state of justice, but when you see people like Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders and other people from the Labour government who resigned whilst asking for a ceasefire, and the people who resigned, Claire Shaw, I believe, from the Blair cabinet because of the war against it, you know there are good people. There are decent people. There are just hearts there. And there is a lot of hope. And inshallah, the collective awakening that is happening now, unfortunately at the expense of the death of such innocent souls, hopefully, this collective awakening and consciousness will not be quietened and will not reverse or regress, but hopefully it will be on the increase. And in that way, we can see a lot of hope. May Allah bless us all and bless our humanity. And I do acknowledge that the cure for humanity is not in the destruction of ISIS or the Zionists. No, that's not the right way to go about. The cure for human ills is in collective awakening. And as we sympathize and empathize with the oppressed, I really feel we need to sympathize and empathize with the oppressor. And I will say this, and forgive me, that if you live in a country where you are constantly indoctrinated from your schooling to your media, then obviously there are mitigating circumstances for why people hate another group. So I'm saying if you see Israelis taking, I'm talking about the main Israelis, not the IDF, if you see them taking pride in killing the Palestinians, do not allow yourselves to hate. It is our human problem. We are guilty of the same in different ways. We are. And that's the truth. Look inside. The cure is in us working towards humanity, removing disinformation, removing hate and biases, and working towards a glorious state of humanity. Forgive me once again for taking such a long time. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Muhammadin al-Mustafa wa ala Ali al-Murtada wa ala Fatimat al-Zahra wa ala al-Hasan al-Mujtaba wa ala al-Hussein al-Shahid بأرض كربلاء وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.